We're going to start Ayin Bays 72B. Ayin Bays on the Bays. Let's see, it's about 15 lines from the bottom. Starting from the words Rabbi Yechon and Kaman. The line starts in my Gemara Ishtay. What we learned was a statement from Rabbi Yechon, which possibly was arguing with the statement of Rish Lakish, but that wasn't clear. The statement of Rabbi Yechon was that if someone lives with his wife that's a nida, so he's chayiv. And if he lives with his sister-in-law, a yavama, that he's supposed to marry, so then he's pater. And she's a nida, he's pater. So we're discussing what's the distinction between his wife, that he would be chayav achatos, even though theoretically that was a mitzvah. There was an avera as well, but theoretically there was a mitzvah that was performed. What was the mitzvah? Well, maybe the mitzvah of Puravu, or maybe the mitzvah of the gladden his wife. The Yavama was also a mitzvah, so we had to make a distinction there. And we said, well, his wife he could ask. The Yavama he wasn't comfortable asking. That was where we left off. Rabbi Yechanan Kaman, who does Rabbi Yechanan hold like? That he says that if there was a mitzvah that he performed, this was all unintentional. He didn't realize that his wife was a nida, or that the Yavam was a nida. Where does this come from? That if there was a mitzvah that he performed during that mistake, that he's exempt from bringing a sacrifice. If we say that it's like Rabbi Yosi the Tanan that was taught in the Mishnah, Rabbi Yosi Yomer Yom Tov Harishon Shel Chag Shechal Yis B'Shabbos. Sukkot falls out on Shabbos, the first day of Sukkot. According to the Torah, you only take the lulav on one day. In the Beis Hamikdash, they took it all 7 days. But everywhere else, it was only one day. You take it on one day. Now, it fell on Shabbos, and he went and he carried it in the Rishus Rabbim. So he's pater. Because he did it with permission. Now, it doesn't actually mean he did it with permission. It means that he did it and he fulfilled the mitzvah. The rabbis tell us not to take it because you may end up carrying, and that's exactly what he did. He ended up carrying, but he fulfilled the mitzvah. This is interesting. There is a discussion if the rabbis tell you not to do something, even though it's biblically a mitzvah. Did you perform a mitzvah, or did the rabbis uproot it from being a mitzvah even biblically? In other words, can the rabbis control what you can accomplish biblically? Like, for example, if you wear tefillin at night, according to the opinions at home, the night is the time for tefillin. They say you shouldn't because your body won't be clean. It possibly isn't clean. So if you did you fulfill a mitzvah? Here it seems that you do fulfill a mitzvah. This would go against, I know the Talmidei Rabbeinu Yoina and Bracha say that you don't. This would be a question on that. Okay. Dilmashani Hassan Dizman Abal. So we're looking for a support for Rabbi Yochanan. Where does he get a source? Where does he get this from? That if you're fulfilling a mitzvah, you're not chayiv achatas. It says he would get it from Rabbi Yosi. It says if you carry on Shabbos a lulav in order to fulfill the mitzvah, you're exempt from achatas. Or it says no. Rabbi Yosi, maybe he allows that, or it's not that he allows it. He says that you're exempt from achatas in that case because he recognizes the stress that the person is under, because he only has 1 day to fulfill the mitzvah. He's really concerned about this. Shani Hassan does manabo. Over there, he has 1 day to fulfill the mitzvah. So that's why over there he's going to be exempt. Over here, lives with his Yavama, he could have done it tomorrow. Elo Rabbi Yeshua d'Zvachim. It must be Rabbi Yeshua of Zvachim. Now, that's referring to what we said, that a sheichet l'shem Pesach, the korban was acceptable, and even though it was on Shabbos, so Rabbi Yeshua says that you're exempt from a sacrifice because the carbon was still was good. That's what we were talking about the last few days. It says over there. What he did was he took another carbon. He shechted it as if it's a carbon pesach. So the rule is that a carbon pesach that's shechted for a different carbon is possible. Another carbon, like a shlamim or something, that doesn't become possible if you have a different carbon in mind. It's still a valid sacrifice. So over there, he thought it was a carbon pesach, so he wants to bring it on Yadalit, and so he brings it. He brings it as a carbon pesach, so that he had one day to bring it. It's only Yadalit, actually, an afternoon. So over there also is manabol. Who says over here he should be exempt by this yivama? He has any day in the world. So maybe it's Rabbi Yeshua that in Shabbos we had a discussion, Rabbi Lezer and Rabbi Yeshua, if someone does a bris on the wrong day and it was actually on Shabbos, so if he fulfilled the mitzvah, Rabbi Yeshua says that he's exempt from the violations of Shabbos. In other words, if it was on a Sunday, if the bris was scheduled for, if the bris was supposed to be on a Friday and he ends up doing it on Shabbos, he did perform the mitzvah. It was just a violation of Shabbos. So he doesn't have to bring the sacrifice for violating Shabbos. Gemara says, over there also, he thinks that today's the day. Well, he has to get it done today. That's why he did it. None of these are support for a case where there's no specific time for him to fulfill this mitzvah. That's our problem here. Elaka Rabbi Yeshua de Truma. Rather, it's Rabbi Yeshua of Truma. The Tanana was taught in the Mishnah. If someone is in the middle of eating his truma, obviously is a kayan. V'naydashu ben Grusha ben Chalutzi finds out he's not a kayan. Mr. Cohen isn't a Cohen. They found out what his mother was actually divorced, or a chalutza. Chalitza was performed, which is also a type of divorce. And then she married his father, who was a kayan, and they had this child. So he was what's called a chalal. He's not considered a kayan, but the kayan gene wouldn't actually determine if someone's a kayan. Could be as a chalal, right? So Rabbi Lezer, what happened was he's eating truma and he finds out and he continues eating. So, is he continuing to eat? No, he's not continuing to eat. He just ate truma and now he finds out that he was never allowed to eat truma because he wasn't really. It's all b'shegi. He was always he was never a kayan. So Rabbi Eliezer Mechayev Karen v'chaimish. Rabbi Eliezer says that he's chayev, and Rabbi Shua paiter. Rabbi Shua says he's exempt. We're assuming here that why is he pater? Because he thought he was doing a mitzvah, and there's no set time for this. And so this could be a support for Rabbi Yechanan. Why does Rabbi Yechanan say that someone that lives with his yivama, and you find out later that she's in nida, and he doesn't have to bring the sacrifices that someone would have to bring, but the chatas, because he performed a mitzvah. So here also, he thought that he was doing a mitzvah by the truma. It turns out he wasn't supposed to, but it was a tayya b'dvar mitzvah, and Rabbi Shua holds that should be exempt. Gemara says, how do you know? Rabbi Bibi Barabaya, truma berev Pesach desman abol. Maybe this case, Rabbi Bibi Barabaya learned this Mishnah, and he said that it's talking about it's truma on erev Pesach, which also has a time constraint, and that's the reason why he is exempt. Is only because of that time. He needs to finish it before this man because it was chama. Inami, another teretz is, another problem is, shani truma deikri avoda. Truma is called an avoda. And maybe there's a special leniency when it comes to avoda service, temple service. Avoda rachmana achsha. And when it comes to temple service, the Torah says that it's kosher if you thought that you were a kayan at that time. The Tanana was taught in the Mishnah. Someone is bringing a sacrifice. And then he finds out, there's a problem. He gets a text. We just found some documents. There was a divorce in the family. or a chalitza. So kol hakabanos kulam shekriv al gabi mizbeach psulim. All the sacrifices that he brought are pasul. Rabbi Shua machshir. Rabbi Shua says no, they're kosher. So v'amrinan, and we said my time at Rabbi Shua. What's the reason? We understand why they should be pasul. What's the reason why they should be kosher? It says the Ksiv Berech Hashem chaylo yafal yadav tirtza. It's the end of it's in Zayis Bracha. Hashem blesses your strength, His strength, and the work of His hands is desired. This is in Levi, I think. So, the blessings that Moshe gave to the tribes. So, the Gemara learns over there that chelai means even if it's a chalal. Hashem blesses, even if he finds out that he's a chalal, Hashem blesses that as well. Hashem accepts it. But where is Truma called Avodah? The Tanya, we have a story. We have a brisa. There was a story. Reb Tarfon didn't come to the Beis Medrash one night. L'shachris matzir Rama Gamliel. Rama Gamliel sees him in the morning. Why didn't he come yesterday to the Beis Medrash? I was too busy doing work. No, it doesn't mean work. It means I was doing a service at the temple. Everything that you say is just a wonder. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. Where do you get work nowadays? The temple was destroyed. What type of service do you have? Amalai. So Reb Tarfon says, it says in the pasuk, a work of a gift to your kayanim. That means the eating of truma is considered a service. Bazara kariv yumas, and the zar that comes close gets the death penalty. So also achilas truma b'gvul and kavaydas beis hamikdash. Eating the truma and the boundaries is considered like the service in the temple. So if the service in the temple doesn't become invalidated if you find out the person was a halal, so that would mean that we don't have a support for Rabbi Yochanan. Because what's the reason why Rabbi Yeshua says he doesn't have to bring a sacrifice when he finds out that he really wasn't a kohen and he was eating truma? Because it was acceptable. Why was it acceptable? Because service is acceptable in the Beis Hamikdash. But what does this have to do with service? Well, truma is considered a service. Okay. We learned in the Mishnah that if the Pesach sacrifice was slaughtered on Shabbos, and the sacrifice was pasul. So it depends why it was pasul. But if the reason why it's pasul was because the people that were registered for this were not able to eat from it, they were old or sick, and so it was slaughtered. It was totally invalid. This Pesach sacrifice was invalid, and he slaughtered it on Shabbos. So we say that when does Rabbi Yeshua say that you're exempt if you did a mitzvah? That's only if you actually did a mitzvah. But over here it wasn't a mitzvah, it was pasul. So you'd be chayiv even according to Rabbi Yeshua. Gemara says pshita. That's obvious. Kivan the hasam pasul hachachaya. Since the sacrifice is pasul, so then if you shecht it on Shabbos, you're going to be chayiv. The Gemara says mishum the tana seifa pater tana reisha chayiv. If you read a little further in the Mishnah says that if you slaughter the sacrifice, the Pesach, for both people that are eligible to eat and for people that are not eligible to eat. So there's a mix over there. So the sacrifice over there is kosher. So over there we say that he's pater. So what the Gemara is suggesting is that I know if the sacrifice is invalid, he's going to be chayiv because he's chayiv achatas, because he slaughtered a sacrifice on Shabbos that was invalid. But that's not necessary to tell me it's invalid. Of course he's chayiv. It says no. What it's coming to tell me is that the other case is that if he slaughters it and it's kosher, because there were people there that were eligible. So once it said that, so it says the other one also that is going to be chayiv. The Gemara says vanami pshita, but that's also obvious. Mishum dahasam kasher afa pater. If it's a valid sacrifice, then it's going to be pater. Ella, I did the tani shachtar shleila shmei b'Shabbos tani nami shleila eichla. Rather, you're right. This whole story was not necessary. It just wanted to tell me the beginning of the Mishnah. And once it said the beginning of the Mishnah, which was if you slaughtered it for the wrong sacrifice, you brought it as a carbon. It was officially a carbon pesach, but you brought it as a shlamim. And over there, we said that it's kosher. Over there, we said that it's not kosher. I'm sorry. And over there, you're chayav v'chatas, because a pesach that's slaughtered for a different sacrifice is puzzle. A different sacrifice is slaughtered for a pesach is kosher. A pesach that's slaughtered for a different sacrifice is puzzle. That's what we were telling us. And therefore, you're going to be chayav v'chatas on Shabbos. So therefore, we continue telling you other psulim, even though that we already know. V'gufal amali. Why does it have to tell me that? We know that it's puzzle. It says no. That was necessary. Mishum de kaboila flugi Rebbe Lezer Rabbi Yeshua, because that was actually machlekes Rebbe Lezer and Rabbi Yeshua regarding the case right afterwards. If it was shachtei, if a different sacrifice was slaughtered for Pesach, that's a machlekes Rebbe Lezer Rabbi Yeshua. So once we got into that, so then we continued on to tell other cases. Amalei Rav Huna bar Chinana lebrei. Rav Huna bar Chinana says to his son, I'm not sure where he is on the charts in the history. Ki azlas lekamid Reb Zrika. When you go in front of Reb Zrika, Boimine ask from him, Ledivrei Yomer mekalkel b'chabura pater. So Shachter Shleiloich Chayev Matikin. Okay, there's a rule in Masechta Shabbos that Shabbos work that you're chayev for is only if it's productive, not if it's destructive. Even things that are destroying, like breaking something down, that's only if you're breaking it in order to fix it. However, there are certain things that are clearly destructive. For example, a chabura. If someone makes a wound in an animal, that's destructive. So how are you going to be chayev for that? So there's two opinions. One says that no, that's an exception. That's an exception. And the other opinion is that no, it has to be for a reason. Like, why would there be a reason to make a wound? Well, maybe you needed the blood. You wanted to use the blood for something. I don't know. So according to the opinion that says that it needs to be constructive work, we just had a Mishnah that says that if someone offers a sacrifice on Shabbos, so if it was a mitzvah, the sacrifice was valid for some reason, so then Rabbi Yeshua says he's exempt. And if it was no mitzvah, then Rabbi Yeshua says he's chayiv. 1 second. If it's no mitzvah, then it's only destructive, and it's not even a malacha, according to this opinion. Mekalkel b'chabura pater, what tikkun, what fixing did he do? What constructive work did he do? If he shechted shleila eichla, for people that aren't eligible to eat, he did nothing. It was just, he just destroyed. So the Gemara answers, tikkun imalo lo yerdu. There is a rule that if the sacrifice was already brought on the altar, we don't degrade it by taking it off when we find out that something was wrong. So in the case where it would have been brought up, that's it also has like some sort of effectiveness that it was brought up, and that's the fact that he slaughtered it. He did that malacha of slaughtering it. That corrects that fine point that if it was brought up, it's not brought down. It's brought on the altar, it's not taken off. Okay, now the Gemara says, Shachtim nimtz balmum chayev matikin. What about if there's a balmum? Over there, the rule is if the sacrifice was never eligible because it had a mum, then even if it's on the altar, you take it off. So how could it be chayiv on Shabbos? You did nothing. You just did destructive work. It says tikkun bedukin shabayin v'ali b'der Rabbi Kiva d'amar alu lo yerdu. We're talking about that the blemish was on the eyelid, and it's according to Rabbi Akiva that holds that a blemish on the eyelid because a bird doesn't have that blemish. So therefore, it's not considered a blemish to the extent that you take it off the altar. He holds that such a type of blemish, Rabbi Kiva holds, that if it's brought on the altar, you don't take it off. So we found a case that it's a balmum, and you still fixed that once it's on the altar, it doesn't come down. The Mishnah said that if there was a treifa, then you're exempt, because how are you supposed to find out that you check the lungs afterwards? You found that there was a adhesion, it was attached to the ribs or whatever. The sacrifice was puzzle. So it says you're exempt for that, because how are you supposed to know? You shefted on Shabbos, and it turns out that it was puzzle. There's no way of knowing. Ha begaloi. But if it was a treifa that was recognizable, then it's chayiv. Now, matikin. No one says that should be brought on the altar, and if it's brought on the altar, you don't take it down. That should be brought down. So it says tikkun lahitzim midei nevela. No, actually, what you did, you still did some fixing. What did you fix? If the animal would have died, the treifa could have died. Not necessarily, but possibly. If it would have died, it would have been a nevela. It would have given off tumah. But now that you shechted it, so you took away the tumah nevela. It's just a piece of meat. It's not tummy. Now it's not kosher to eat, but it's not tummy. It's not a nevela. It doesn't give off tumah. It doesn't impart tumah to people that touch it. Maskefla Ravina. Ravina has a question. Hadetanya, there was taught in a brisa. Ashechet chatas b'Shabbos b'chutz l'avodah zarah. This is trying to add up how many sins he could commit. So he shechts a carbon chatas on Shabbos outside the temple, and he has intention that he's shechting it for avodah zarah. So it says chayav alei gimel chatais. He's chayav 3 chatas. What are the 3 chatas? Well, he slaughtered on Shabbos. Kachim b'chutz. It's a sacrifice outside the temple, and it's for avodah zarah. It's slaughtered for avodah zarah. The question is, matikin. Why does he have to bring a chatas on Shabbos? He did nothing here. What are you going to tell me? That he did constructive work? What constructive work? What did he do? You're going to tell me, well, if he didn't shecht it and it just would have died, then it would have been a nevela. Now that he shechted it, it's not a nevela. That's correct. It's not a nevela. The problem is that avodah zarah gives off tumah. So if it was a nevela, it would be tamei, and now that he shechted for avodah, it's still tamei. So it's not like it's tahar. So what did he fix? Yes, it may be a different tumah, but it's still tamei. He didn't fix anything. Amar Rav Avira shemitzimi de'ever menachai. The non-Jew would eat it. It would be ever menachai. If he didn't shecht it, it would have been ever menachai. Now that he shechted it, so it's only takruvas avodah zarah. I don't know why that's any better. Why is that better if he brought it for avodah zarah? Non-Jew can't. A non-Jew can't worship. It doesn't mean that he can't eat something that was brought. I guess that's the answer. So he saved him from violating the Ever Menachai. The Rabbi Hanan answers him. If it would have been Ever Menachai, he would have violated Ever Menachai, even if he didn't eat a full kazayas of basar. If he would have eaten, even if the kazayas could have included a kazayas of basar with that tamas, and that would have been considered an Ever Menachai, and he didn't have to eat a kazayas of basar. But now that he shechted it, and it's not even menachai, then if he's going to eat it, it's going to need to be a kazayas of basar itself. That's what it looks like for Rabbeinu Hanan is answering. Okay. Shachtu v'naida hulu. Okay, we're getting into an interesting discussion over here. If the person shechts the carbon pesach, but he finds out that later, after he shechted on Shabbos, he finds out that the people that were offering this Korban Pesach all retracted, and they signed up to they registered themselves on other Korban Pesach. So this was just a total waste. Or he finds out that the people that were registered for this, the owners, whatever, they died, or they became tamid. So he's exempt, because even though the Korban Pesach was really invalid, but when he was shechting it, it was reshus. He had permission to shecht it because that's what he was told, and that's what he understood. He found out later that it's not going to work because they did something. It wasn't his. Okay. Amar Rav Huna Amar Rav. Rav Huna says in the name of Rav. Rav Huna is a famous student of Rav. Asham shenitik l'ri'iyah. The rule is that a korban chatas or a korban asham can only be brought for the owner. But if for whatever reason the owner got his atonement some other way, or maybe he died or something. So if it would be a chatas, what do you do with that animal? So we say that it has to be put to death. What do you do if it's an asham? In other words, it's an asham that has no purpose. Chatas, I don't know. If it's an asham, then you let it graze until it gets a mum. Then you're allowed to shecht it. And then you use the money that you got from that meat and you buy a korban oila. So the chatas was very strict; it just dies, and there's no value to that. By the asham, you do get some value, and then you bring it as a oila. What happens to an oila? Oila is also just a burnt offering. So, but the skin does go to the kainim, and the Beis Hamikdash gets an oila. Okay. So an asham shenitik l'riya, an asham that was uprooted from being an asham, and it was put into the pen to graze till it gets a mum. So we think it's going to get a mum. It's going to graze over there. It's not being protected, and we'll get a mum. V'shachtu stam, but instead of getting a mum, you went ahead and you shechted it. Kosher la'oila. This is a little bit strange. What the case would need to be that you brought it into the Beis Hamikdash and you shechted it as an oila, it would be kosher. Now, even though it didn't get the mum yet, okay, Alma, what do we see? Kasavar loiboy akira. Even if you shechted it stam, you see the asham turns into an oila. The value of it goes into an oila. Even if you shechted it stam and then you wanted to continue this process as an oila, I don't know how that works, because I thought you needed to designate it by the shechita what sacrifice it is. But apparently, what Rav is saying, Rav Huna is saying in the name of Rav, is that even if you just did a shechita, it would be considered an oila, and you can continue that sacrifice as an oila. Alma kasavar by akira. Must be the Rav holds that you don't need akira. We had a whole discussion about a korban pesach that was shechted, or another korban that was shechted for a different. Does it automatically become the new sacrifice? Do you need an akira? Do you have to change it, or does it go automatic? Anyway, apparently Rav says that it goes automatic. Leiboy akira, even shachtistam. The Gemara says, why did Rav say that you had to take it out of the pan? Take it out and put it in the pan, and then you shechted it. Maybe once the owner died, and it's an asham, it's automatically an oila. So why do you have to put it into the pan? Why does it need the nitik? Nitik means it's removed and put into the pan that it's going to graze and get the mum. Even if you didn't put it in the pan, you just took it to the Beis Hamikdash and you shechted it. It's an oila. The Gemara says no, that's not, because gzeira lacha kapara telifnei kapara. We have a concern. If he's not going to put it into the pan, and he's just going to offer it as a sacrifice, so even though theoretically it becomes an oila according to Rav, but we do have a gezeira there, and the gezeira is that, let's say this owner needs to bring a korban oila, and he also needs to bring an asham. Now, for whatever reason, he got absolved from the asham. He brought a different one as an asham. He designated 2 karbanos for an asham. He didn't know maybe one gets lost. So he brought his asham already. And now he needs to bring an ayla. So let's say he says, I'm just going to take that asham that I have, I'll bring it as an ayla because it's anyway supposed to be an ayla. So that's a problem because you're not allowed to exchange a carbon, just plain to exchange a carbon. So we say that that's not valid. Only once he puts it into the pen to get a mum, and then he takes it. So then for some reason we don't have that gezerah anymore. And then he takes it as an ayla, then it would be valid. And we not tamra. Where do you know that there's this gezerah? Where do you get this from? That you have this gezerah that he may just exchange it for an ayla, even the fnei kapara. I'm sorry. It's talking about even if he didn't bring, it was a gezerah that he may do it even before he brings his asham. That's the problem. He may take his asham that he needs to bring and instead bring it as an ayla and say, I'll bring my asham later. Where do we know that we have this gezerah? The Tanana was taught in the Mishnah, asham shemesa bailav, a karban asham, a guilt offering, that the owners passed away. Or the owners had a different atonement, they had a different sacrifice. Yirad you put it into a pan until it gets a mum, you sell it, you put damav l'nadava, and the money goes to a nadava, a donation. Rabbi Lezer says no, it's just like a chatas, you just put it to death. Rabbi Shua says no, you sell it, and you bring with the money an ayla. So there's a difference between a nadava and an ayla. What's the difference? If he does smicha, goes to nadava, then it's not his sacrifice; it's a communal sacrifice. If he brings it as an ayla, he does smicha on it, and it's considered his sacrifice. B'damav in aval gufay lai. It's only what part of the sacrifice is an ayla is only its value, not the actual animal. The gazalacha kapara lefnei kapara shmamina. Why can't you just bring the animal itself? Because of the gezerah. There's a gezerah that even before kapara you may end up bringing it as an ayla. Shmamina. Okay. Eisvei Rav Chizda le Rav Huna. Rav Chizda has a question to Rav Huna. Shachtu, a question from our Mishnah, wondering how this all came in. In our Mishnah it says, Shachtu v'noida shemashchu yibaylam es yadayim. Our Mishnah says that if a person shechts a carbon Pesach and then he finds out that the owners retracted and they registered themselves on a different sacrifice, or they died, or whatever. B'tani Allah, and it was taught of Nebraisa on that Mishnah. B'chol ki hagavna yisarif miyad. Now, we learned that although the sacrifice is possible, but he's exempt from a carbon. He's exempt from a carbon chatas for sacrificing that chatas on Shabbos because he didn't know better. He did what he was supposed to do. He did what he was supposed to do. The carbon pesach was brought on Shabbos. Everything was correct. The owners were the ones that retracted, and it wasn't this person's fault. It was considered an einus more than a shaykling. Okay. The Brisa says that what do you do now with the sacrifice? So if it's Shabbos, then you're not allowed to burn the. It's a puzzle sacrifice. If it's Shabbos, you're not allowed to burn it on Shabbos. Just to burn it, you have to wait till after Shabbos. But if it's a weekday, the Brisa says, Ki agavni yisarf miyad. You burn it immediately. If we say that it's a carbon pesach, until you say that it's a shlamim. In other words, a carbon pesach remains a carbon. A carbon pesach could exchange with a shlamim. There's a similarity between an asham and the carbon pesach, in that an asham becomes a shlamim. An asham becomes an ayla, and a carbon pesach becomes a shlamim. If it's not being brought correctly or in the correct time or whatever. The asham, if the owner had his his atonement some other way, so this carbon becomes a oila. Now it has to be, the value of it turns into the oila, and the carbon pesach, actual animal, becomes a shlamim. So Rav said that you don't need akira, because if you actually offered it as an oila, or if you actually offered it stam, it becomes an oila. So what's going on over here? I had a carbon pesach that I'm offering, and it's not really a kosher carbon pesach. Why? Because the owners retracted. If you say that you have to uproot it in order to make it into a shlamim, hi pesachu. This is a carbon pesach. Given the Leslie Bailim, and since there's no owners, so it's invalid. The actual sacrifice is invalid. And therefore, Yisaref miyat, it gets burnt right away. That's the rule. A psul beguf is burnt right away. You burn the sacrifice. But if we say, like the way Rav said, that an asham doesn't need an akira, it just automatically turns into an ayla. If the owners retract it, it's a shlamim. Why is it even puzzle? I don't need registered people for a shlamim. What was a shlamim? It's a very good question. Mishum davar acher. The only problem would be a side problem. The kashachet le'acher tamid shel bein arbayim, that you slaughtered it after the afternoon sacrifice. So it says that iber tzurabai, that you don't burn it immediately. That would be a real sacrifice. In order to burn kachim, it has to be so invalid that it's burnt. You don't just destroy kachim. What do you do if it's not, you're not supposed to eat it or whatever, if it has a psul? So you have to let it sit overnight, and then it becomes puzzle because it stayed overnight, psulina, and then you burn it. So over here, if it's not intrinsically, if it's not a psul in the carbon itself, it was just a secondary issue, so then you should stay overnight, not burn it right away. It's a kashan Rav. Rav said that loy yakira, an asham automatically becomes an oila, so the carbon pesach should automatically be a shlamim. And then what's going on with the brisa? The brisa says that you burn it. Why should you burn it? It should wait overnight. The Tanya was taught in the brisa. Zeha klal. Here's the rule: kol shepsula begufa yisarf miyad. Anything that's intrinsically possible, so it gets burnt. However, bedam or bebailim. But if the problem is something in the blood, or something because of the owners, so then tuber tzurasi v'etzel beisos shreifa. Then you let it stay overnight. Rashi learns tuber tzurasi means you let its form change, which means, according to Rashi, you let it stay overnight. The other Rishonim learn that it means you let it rot. But Rashi says it just means you let it get a different psul and then you burn it. So over here it became a carbon shlamim. Just burn it. We have to go back. Rav Chisda says, strong question on Rav Huna, the way Rav Huna quoted Rav, that Asham Shenitik L'Riya V'Shachtu Stam, it's kosher as an oila. Because of Rav Chisda's question, he says it can't be. It must be that Shachtu L'Shum Oila becomes an oila. You have to actually be oikerit. If you're not oikerit, it stays as an Asham. So to over here, a carbon pesach that you slaughtered, until you say that it's a shlamim, that until you designate it as a shlamim, it remains a carbon pesach. And then, carbon pesach without owners, that's possible. And that's why it gets burned.
What does problem with the blood refer to?
If the blood spilt, or the blood spilled out, and then you
blood
weren't able to
spilled out of the bowl?
Yeah, you weren't able to sprinkle the blood.
Okay.
Or there's a problem, and the problem with the owners is the owners died or they became tamei. And then what do you do with the sacrifice? There's no one to eat it. Okay, so you wait till it becomes possible. In other words, it doesn't have an intrinsic problem, it has a secondary problem. So we just answered this discussion by changing what Rav Huna said, changing what Rav said, and we say that it's Rav actually holds that you need to do an akira. You have to actually change it from its original sacrifice. Rab Chia bar Gamda, the Amar, we had this before. Rab Chia bar Gamda had an interesting phrase on this. He says, the Amar, he says, Nizukam Pichabura. An expression came out from the group. We have a question now. He said that we had this discussion before. Do you need an akira? Do you not need an akira? So Rav Chia bar Gamda said that if the owners of this Karban Pesach became Tameh, and they were actually hoping to bring their Karban on Pesach Sheni, so then the Karban Pesach remains a Karban Pesach until you make an akira on it, until you say, no, it's a shlamim. But in another case where there is no Pesach Sheni, they're not waiting for a Pesach Sheni. They brought the Pesach Rishon on a different sacrifice. So then it automatically becomes a Pesach Sheni. It automatically becomes a shlamim, which basically, in other words, means that you don't need an akira. It's only one case where you need an akira, because the owners are hanging around with their sacrifice to bring it a month later. That's when you need to be akira, because it's still a Karban Pesach. But normally you don't need an akira. So according to him, what's the pshat in the Mishnah? If the owner's registered somewhere else, automatically it should be a shlamim. You never need an akira. It's only in that one case where you need an akira. Elam Rav Huna Breder Rav Yeshua Chamayaskinan. Rav Huna Breder Rav Yeshua says, here, what are we dealing with? They designated the sacrifice before Chatzos. Umesu bailam acher Chatzos. And the owners died after Chatzos. What we're looking for is a way to invalidate the sacrifice in a way, in such a serious way that it's going to be burnt. And it can't be used as a shlamim. It can't be considered a shlamim. So what are we going to do? We wanted to get into a category of nidcha. Nidcha means that if the sacrifice is rejected, it can't be brought back. How was the sacrifice rejected? Well, it was eligible at the time to bring, and then it becomes rejected. So rejected sacrifice is not brought back in. So the Habalei Nira, it was eligible, the nidcha, and then it's rejected. And we have a rule that anything that's rejected doesn't come back. The Gemara says, 1 second. Who are you trying to help over here? You're trying to help Rav, because Rav held that there's such a thing as akira, if you're going to go back onto that, and say that there's an akira, that you don't need an akira, that it becomes a shlamim automatically. Rav says that there's no such thing as a live animal being rejected. It can only be rejected after the shechita. While it's alive, there's no rejection. Okay, so what's the pshat over here? Why does the sacrifice get burnt? It's actually the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. The Amar v'chein ha'sheichet acherim l'shem Pesach pasel the havalei psulei begufay. Rabbi Eliezer holds that yes, it becomes a Karban shlamim. However, any sacrifice that's offered for the sake of a Karban Pesach, just like a Karban Pesach, if I offer a Karban Pesach shaloi l'shmai as a shlamim, it's pasul. If I offer a shlamim for a Pesach, it's pasul. Because it works both ways. So if that's the case, then this is a psul begufay. You offered this Karban Pesach that doesn't have any owners, that the owners, whatever, they retracted, they went to other things. So, or they tamei, or they died. So you wanted to say that it should become a shlamim. Fine, it becomes a shlamim. But if you slaughter a shlamim for the sake of a Pesach, it's pasul, and that's why you burn it. We were asking, why does the Brisa say you burn it? If it becomes automatically a shlamim, it says no. We're not discussing if it becomes automatically a shlamim. All we're saying is that a shlamim that you offer as a Karban Pesach is burnt. The Gemara says, 1 second. The Rabbi Eliezer, if it's Rabbi Eliezer, you have to look at the Mishnah. The Mishnah says that the guy It had nothing to do. He was an Inus. If you slaughtered it on Shabbos, he's Potter. And then the Brisa says, but if it's during the week, it's burnt right away. And we're asking all of this during the week. Why do you burn it right away? It should have been a shlamim. So we're saying, okay, fine, it's a shlamim. But you slaughtered a shlamim for the sake of a Pesach. The opinion of Rabbi Eliezer holds that it gets burnt. Go back to our Mishnah. So if it's offered on Shabbos, the Mishnah says that he's Potter because he's exempt, because he was an Einus. Now, according to Rabbi Eliezer had an argument with Rabbi Yeshua. If the sacrifice is not valid, Rabbi Eliezer would hold that he's chayav v'chatas, not Potter. Gemara says, okay. Rabbi Eliezer chatas nami mechayev. The less leila Rabbi Eliezer tayeh b'dvar mitzvah Potter. Rabbi Eliezer doesn't hold tayeh b'dvar mitzvah is Potter. Here, the person, he offered a sacrifice on Shabbos, but he thought he was doing it correctly, so therefore he should be Potter. Rabbi Eliezer doesn't hold him that. Rabbi Eliezer holds if it's not valid, automatically you're chayav. That's Rabbi Eliezer opinion. El Tirguma Rav Yosef Breder Rav Salah Chasida Kameder Rav Papa. Rav Yosef, the son of Rav Salah Chasida, says in the name of Rav Papa, he translates Hamani Yosi ben Chunoi. Who's saying this? This is Yosi ben Chunoi. The Tanan was taught in the Mishnah. Yosi ben Chunoi Yomer Neshchatim l'shem Pesach l'shem Chatas Psulim. Anything that's slaughtered for the sake of a Korban Pesach, for the sake of a Chatas, is puzzle. No, it's a different sacrifice that's slaughtered for that. Alma Psula Begufayu. Mishmach Yisarf Miyad. We have a good answer. Our problem with saying that it's Rabbi Eliezer is because we know two things from Rabbi Eliezer. One is that a sacrifice that's slaughtered for a korban Pesach is puzzle, and we also know that he holds that if it's not a valid sacrifice and it's slaughtered on Shabbos, Yechayev v'chatas. Now, because Rabbi Eliezer holds both of those opinions, it can't be Rabbi Eliezer because we said that if it's slaughtered on Shabbos, he's pater. Rabbi Eliezer would say chayev. So we say, basically what we're doing is we're saying that he holds like Rabbi Eliezer regarding one thing, but he holds like Rabbi Yeshua regarding something else. But the way of doing that is that we actually have another opinion that is not Rabbi Eliezer that holds that anything that's slaughtered for the sake of a Pesach or a Chatas is possible. And we don't know anything what this opinion holds about if it's slaughtered on Shabbos as a mistake. Is he going to be chayav v'chatas for violating Shabbos? So we say, no, okay, he holds like Rabbi Yeshua for Shabbos. We resolved the issue. Rav Ashi Amar, Rav the Amar Rabbi Yishmael b'nai Shor Rabbi Yechon ben Breika. Rav is actually following Rabbi Yishmael b'nai Shor Rabbi Yechon ben Breika. The Tanya was taught in the Brisa. Rabbi Yishmael b'nai Shor Rabbi Yechon ben Breika Imer im yeshois b'yem leida mashchabal mesidem meshmeser shnitmu chayav v'tu b'terasi v'etzel beis esreif. If the sheichet should have found out or could have found out what's going on with the owners, are the owners still alive? He could have done his due diligence and checked what's going on with the owners, and he didn't. So then he's chayav v'chata, and the sacrifice is left overnight, and then it's burnt. My timer. What's the reason? Lamisham delay by Akira. Why do we say it's left overnight? Because we say that it becomes a shlamim. So why? So then why is it invalid? It's invalid because it was slaughtered after the korban tamid in the afternoon. So there's a minor, a secondary invalidation here, and that's why it's going to be left overnight. My timer, Lamisham blei by Akira. Gemara says, "Mimai." How do you know that that's the pshat? Vilma misham de savala ketana de be Rabba baravua damar afila be pigelnami ibetzura by ibetzura. The aleph of Einavein Minaisa. Maybe it's because he holds that you always do ibetzura, even by something that's very invalid, like for example pigel, which that's a psul begufay. He also holds that ibetzura, you have to leave it overnight. If you don't say this, then nitmu baila mayak lameiman pavadai bayakira. It says we learned on this that this was actually the case of where the owners are waiting for Pesach Sheni, and you need to have an Akira. So, and according to that, if you do need an Akira, so if you do need an Akira, then why would you need, then it's a Pesach Sheni, so why would it need Ibertura? It must be that this is the opinion of Rabba Baravua, that you always need Ibertura. Okay, so what are we left with? Rather, we're going to explain that what we're dealing with here is that this case of Shachtu, if it was slaughtered and we find out that the owners signed up to another sacrifice, there's really no owners here. So we say that the person is pater. He's pater because he didn't know better and he did what he was supposed to do. He thought that they were dead. The only problem is that it's Yisarif Miyad. Why is it burnt right away? It's a secondary issue. It should become a shlamim. We answer, the reason why is because it's a shlamim that's slaughtered for the sake of the Korban Pesach. And we're following the opinion of Yossi ben Chunai that holds that a shlamim that's shechted for the sake of a Korban Pesach is invalid. And that's why, even though the sacrifice is invalid, but he's exempt. But that's why the brisa makes sense that it gets burnt right away, because it's a psul b'gufin. Okay. Yeah.